Hey guys, tonight we're not just going to tell a story, we're going to feel a story. Close your eyes for a moment if you can, and imagine the air around you isn't the comfortable temperature you're used to. No, it's sharp, it's biting, it's a living thing that sinks its teeth right through your modern, cozy pajamas. You can practically see your breath fogging in the space just inches from your face, even indoors. The walls around you, they're not insulated, not drywalled, not heated by some invisible magic from a thermostat. They're rough-hewn timbers, packed with mud and straw, and the wind, that cruel, insistent whisper, finds every crack, every crevice. You pull your threadbare blanket tighter, but it feels less like comfort and more like a thin veil between you and oblivion. The light from the dying embers in the hearth casts long, dancing shadows, making the familiar corners of your tiny home seem menacing, alien. Outside, the world is a canvas of white and gray, a vast, silent wilderness where every gust of wind sounds like a hungry beast, and the silence between those gusts is even more terrifying. The knowledge that the next few months will be a relentless test of endurance, of sheer, stubborn will, settles deep in your bones, heavy and cold. You probably won't survive this. Not with your modern sensibilities, your reliance on convenience and warmth. This isn't just a tough winter. It's a brutal, unforgiving gauntlet. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shiver, a deep, bone-rattling tremor that has nothing to do with fear and everything to do with the insidious chill seeping into every fiber of your being. It's early autumn, or what passes for it here in your little corner of medieval Europe, but the air already carries the unmistakable metallic tang of coming snow. You pull your tattered woolen tunic tighter, uselessly, against the creeping cold. The days have been shortening with an alarming speed, each sunset painting the sky with the fierce, transient beauty of a dying fire. The sun, when it bothers to show itself, hangs low and pale, offering no real warmth, just a mocking, distant light. The fields, recently alive with the rustling of grain, are now stubbled and bare, the earth hardened by the first tentative frosts. You watch your breath bloom in the air, a ghost of your impending struggle. This isn't a modern winter, with its predictable cycles of central heating, warm clothes, and grocery stores stocked with every imaginable foodstuff. No, this is a medieval winter, a truly formidable adversary that demands every ounce of your ingenuity and resilience. You live in a small, isolated village, a cluster of thatched roofs huddled together against the vast, indifferent wilderness. Your life, and indeed the lives of everyone you know, revolves entirely around the land. And right now, the land is preparing to shut down, to sleep, to offer nothing. You feel it in your joints, a dull ache that isn't just from the physical labor of the harvest, but from the looming prospect of months spent in a state of perpetual chill. The first hard frost is always a moment of quiet dread, a grim herald. You wake to find the world transformed, a sparkling, brittle landscape where every blade of grass is rimmed with ice, and the puddles in the muddy track outside your hovel have a thin, glassy skin. You can hear the crackle of it underfoot as you make your way to the communal well, the sound sharp and unforgiving. Your fingers, even tucked into the sleeves of your tunic, quickly turn numb as you grasp the rough rope. The water, when you finally draw it up, is painfully cold, a shock to your system that jolts you awake more effectively than any strong brew ever could. Days shorten, and the light becomes a precious commodity. You find yourself hurrying through tasks, trying to squeeze every last drop of daylight from the brief hours between dawn and dusk. The evenings stretch long and dark, illuminated only by the flickering, smoky light of your hearth fire. You learn to move by touch in the gloom, navigating your small dwelling with practiced ease, avoiding the rough edges of furniture, the occasional stray implement left on the dirt floor. The very air inside your home feels dense, heavy with the smell of wood smoke, damp earth, and unwashed bodies. It's a primal scent, one that speaks of close quarters and constant struggle against the elements. One mainstream historical fact about medieval winters is that they were often far more severe and prolonged than modern winters, particularly during periods like the Little Ice Age, which began around the 14th century. This meant shorter growing seasons, more frequent crop failures, and increased hardship for communities entirely dependent on agriculture. You feel the truth of this in your bones as the days grow colder and shorter. The harvest this year was barely adequate, and the granaries of the Lord's manor, you suspect, hold far more than the communal stores. A quirky or fringe tidbit about medieval winter preparations involves something called winter dreaming. While not a formalized practice, some historical accounts suggest that peasant communities would engage in periods of almost ritualistic storytelling and shared dreaming around the hearth during the darkest parts of winter. This wasn't just entertainment. It was believed to connect them to ancestral spirits, to ensure the land's eventual reawakening, and to collectively endure the psychological toll of isolation and scarcity. You've heard the elders speak of it, a quiet murmur about listening to the long dream of the earth as the snow piled high outside. It sounds a bit like a medieval version of a Netflix binge, only with more spiritual intention and significantly less comfortable seating. Historians still argue whether the perceived increased severity of medieval winters was solely due to climatic shifts or also exacerbated by factors like deforestation, which could have altered local microclimates and made regions more susceptible to extreme cold. As you look out at the surrounding forest, already stripped of its leaves, you can't help but wonder if the endless demand for firewood has played its own part in the increasing bite of the wind. The trees stand like skeletal guardians, their branches reaching up, seemingly begging for the meager warmth of the sun. The sounds of the village change with the coming cold. The cheerful chatter of summer gives way to a more muted existence. Voices are lower, movements more deliberate. The laughter of children, though still present, has a sharper, more urgent quality, quickly swallowed by the vast silence of the snow-laden air. The squeal of pigs, the lowing of cattle, the clucking of chickens, all seem subdued, as if the animals themselves sense the coming hardship and are conserving their energy. Even the barking of the village dogs sounds less boisterous, more like a desperate plea for warmth. You hear the rhythmic thump of an axe in the distance, someone else desperately trying to secure their fuel supply, a sound that serves as a constant, subtle reminder of the collective struggle. It's a symphony of survival played in a minor key. You wrap yourself tighter in your rough wool cloak, the fabric scratchy against your skin. The wool, spun and woven right here in the village, is thick but not soft. Comfort is a luxury you can barely conceive of. The concept of a modern fleece blanket, warm and impossibly light, would be pure magic to your medieval mind. You'd probably think it was woven from spiderwebs by benevolent spirits. And heating pads? Forget about it. You're lucky if you can warm a stone by the fire and tuck it under your feet for a few precious moments before it cools into a lump of useless rock. This is your reality now, the relentless onset of winter, and all you can do is brace yourself for the long, cold darkness ahead. The hovel you call home is less a dwelling and more a carefully constructed cave, a meager bulwark against the elements. You step inside, and the sudden shift in temperature is barely noticeable, a subtle lessening of the biting wind, nothing more. The walls are not solid, welcoming structures of stone or brick, but rather a chaotic patchwork of wattle and daub. Imagine weaving branches and twigs together like a giant, clumsy basket, then smearing that frame with a sticky concoction of mud, clay, straw, and sometimes even animal dung. That's your exterior. It's remarkably effective at keeping out the direct blast of the wind, but it's far from airtight. You can hear the wind even indoors, a constant, mournful sigh that seems to penetrate the very fabric of your existence. It whispers through invisible cracks, stirring the sparse rushes on the dirt floor, making the smoke from the hearth dance erratically. You've long since given up trying to truly seal every gap. It's a futile exercise like trying to catch mist in a sieve. Instead, you learn to live with the drafts, to position yourself strategically by the fire, to pile more blankets on your straw mattress, if you're lucky enough to have one, to avoid the coldest spots. Your roof is a thick layer of thatch, usually made from reeds, straw, or heather. It's surprisingly good at insulation when properly maintained, a thick, shaggy blanket that holds in what little warmth you can generate. But it's also a haven for all sorts of tiny creatures. You've grown accustomed to the faint scratching noises above you at night, the occasional scurry of a mouse or the rustle of a bird that has decided your roof is a five-star hotel. You might even find a beetle or two dropping onto your face if you lie too close to a particularly saggy patch. It's just part of the charm, right? A rustic, integrated pest management system, if you squint hard enough and embrace the medieval spirit. The single, small opening that serves as your window, if you can even call it that, is usually just a wooden shutter, closed tightly against the elements. There's no glass, of course. Glass is a luxury beyond your wildest imaginings, something for cathedrals and kings. So, when the shutter is closed, your home is plunged into near darkness, even in the middle of the day. The only light comes from the perpetually smoldering hearth, or, if you're fortunate, a flickering tallow candle, a rather smelly affair made from animal fat. The light it casts is dim and greasy, barely pushing back the oppressive gloom. You learn to do much of your indoor work by touch, your fingers adept at finding tools, mending clothes, or preparing meager meals in the perpetual twilight. The floor beneath your feet is simply packed earth, sometimes covered with rushes or straw for a bit of warmth and to absorb spills and muck. These rushes are changed periodically, but not nearly often enough to keep things truly clean. Over time, the floor becomes a compacted layer of dirt, debris, and the general detritus of daily life. It's cold underfoot, even through thick woolen socks, and the dampness seems to seep up from the ground, clinging to everything. This isn't the kind of damp that makes you feel refreshed. It's a clammy, pervasive cold that promises aches and stiffness. Consider the layout of your home. Usually just one room, maybe two if you're a slightly more prosperous peasant, but even then, it's a shared space. Your entire family, parents, children, sometimes even grandparents or other relatives, sleeps, eats, and lives in this single, confined area. Personal space? That's a concept as foreign as central heating. You wake to the sounds of your family stirring, the rustle of straw, the gentle snores of your father, the quiet murmur of your mother already attending to the fire. There's a constant, low hum of activity, an intimate closeness that is both a comfort and, at times, a source of unavoidable friction. Arguments are short and sharp, quickly stifled, because there's nowhere to escape to. You're all in this damp, drafty box together. One mainstream historical fact about medieval peasant homes is that they often housed not only the family but also their most valuable livestock, especially during the bitterest parts of winter. The body heat generated by a cow, a pig, or a few sheep was a crucial, natural source of warmth. You can smell them, of course, the earthy scent of straw, the pungent odor of animal waste, the distinct smell of their breath. It's an undeniable presence, a constant reminder that you are sharing your limited space with creatures who, in their own way, are also struggling to survive the cold. It's also an added layer of responsibility. The well-being of your animals directly impacts your family's survival in the lean months to come. Imagine trying to sleep with a snoring pig in the corner. You just might get used to it, or develop a very particular pig-based white noise machine. A quirky or fringe tidbit about medieval homes is the common belief in house spirits or familiars associated with the hearth. These benevolent or sometimes mischievous entities, often called hob or brownie in English folklore, were thought to reside within the home and protect the family and their animals, particularly in winter. Offerings of milk or a piece of bread might be left out for them, a small, hopeful gesture in the face of overwhelming odds. You might scoff at it now, but in the deep, silent nights of medieval winter, when the wind howled and the hunger gnawed, wouldn't you want to believe something was watching over you, even if it was just a tiny, invisible helper? Historians still argue whether the apparent lack of privacy in medieval peasant homes contributed to stronger community bonds, or if it led to increased domestic strife and a higher tolerance for close quarters. As you rub shoulders with your family, feeling the warmth of their bodies radiating through their rough clothing, you can feel both the comforting solidarity and the subtle friction of constant proximity. There's no escaping each other, for better or worse. You learn to read the subtle cues, the tightening of a jaw, the slump of a shoulder, because avoiding conflict in such confined spaces is a skill essential for survival. The smoke from the hearth is another constant companion. There's usually no chimney in your hovel, just a smoke hole in the roof, or perhaps a simple hood to direct some of the fumes. Much of the smoke, however, simply fills the room before slowly, reluctantly, finding its way out. Your eyes often sting, and your throat feels scratchy. Everything you own, your clothes, your hair, even the food you eat, carries the pervasive scent of wood smoke. It's a part of you now, an olfactory signature of your existence, a smell that speaks of warmth and, simultaneously, of the hardship required to obtain it. You adjust the rough woolen blanket that serves as a curtain over the doorway, trying to block out just a fraction more of the penetrating cold. The door itself is a simple wooden plank, hinged crudely, and it never quite fits flush against the frame. There's always a sliver of darkness, a tiny crack that lets in a sliver of the outside world, a world that, right now, is growing increasingly hostile. This is your sanctuary, your refuge, but it's a porous one, constantly reminding you of your vulnerability. You are at the mercy of the elements, and your only defense is this thin shell of wood and mud, and the shared warmth of those you love. And, of course, the ever-present, faint hope that winter won't last forever. With your hovel offering only the most rudimentary protection, your thoughts, and indeed your very survival, turn relentlessly to fuel. Not the liquid gold of oil, nor the hidden power of gas, but the raw, unyielding energy locked within wood. Every single branch, every fallen twig, every dead tree stump becomes a precious commodity, a life or death decision. You understand, on a visceral level, that without fire, you simply won't make it through the long, dark months. It's not just about warmth for your body. It's about cooking your meager food, drying your damp clothes, keeping disease at bay, and fending off the crushing psychological darkness that the relentless cold brings. The process of gathering firewood is an arduous, year-round chore that intensifies as winter looms. You spend countless hours in the nearby forest, a place that is both a provider and, at times, a deeply intimidating presence. The trees stand tall and silent, their branches skeletal against the pale sky. In summer, the forest felt alive, teeming with birdsong and rustling leaves. Now it's hushed, almost somber, and the air bites with a chill that seems to emanate from the very earth. You don't just walk in and pick up perfectly chopped logs, of course. This isn't a lumberyard. You're looking for anything that will burn. This means scavenging for deadfall branches and trees brought down by storms or simply old age. You learn to recognize the best wood, the kind that's dry and seasoned, that will burn with a steady heat rather than just smoking miserably. Green wood is heavy, difficult to transport, and burns inefficiently, spitting and hissing rather than providing comforting warmth. So you're always on the lookout for that dry, brittle snap that tells you you've found a good piece. Sometimes you might be allowed to coppice certain trees. This is a traditional woodland management technique where trees like hazel or willow are cut back to ground level, encouraging new shoots to grow. These young, straight poles can then be harvested regularly for firewood, basketry, or building materials. It's a sustainable practice, yes, but it still requires backbreaking labor. Imagine swinging a crude axe, your muscles screaming with effort, trying to fell a small tree or hack off a thick branch. The blows echo through the silent woods, a lonely, rhythmic testament to your struggle. Your hands, even in rough gloves, become chapped and raw, often blistering. Splinters are a constant companion, small, irritating reminders of your toil. Transporting the wood back to your hovel is almost as hard as gathering it. You don't have wagons, certainly not easy access to beasts of burden. So you might fashion a crude sledge from a couple of branches, or you simply strap bundles of wood onto your back. The weight presses down on you, making every step a deliberate effort as you trudge through uneven terrain, often through knee-deep snow. The journey feels endless, your breath coming in ragged gasps, steam rising from your body in the frigid air. You fantasize about simply collapsing, but the image of your family huddled in the cold hovel, waiting for the warmth you're carrying, pushes you onward. This constant need for fuel means that access to forests is a point of contention. While your lord might permit you to gather deadwood, venturing into the deepest parts of the lord's forest, or cutting down living trees without permission, could lead to severe punishment. Poaching timber is taken as seriously as poaching game, sometimes even more so, because it threatens the Lord's resources directly. You've heard stories of men losing hands, or even their lives, for daring to steal from the Lord's wood. So you stick to the fringes, to the areas where permission is tacitly granted, or where the risk of being caught is minimized. It's a delicate dance between desperate need and the harsh realities of feudal law. One mainstream historical fact about medieval fuel is that peat was a significant alternative to wood in areas where it was abundant, such as parts of Ireland, Scotland, and the Low Countries. Peat, essentially compressed, partially decomposed plant matter, burns slowly and steadily, providing a consistent heat, though often with a distinctive earthy smell. If you lived in such a region, your daily ritual might involve cutting bricks of peat from bogs, then stacking them to dry for months before they could be used as fuel. Imagine the joy of having a reliable, albeit smelly, heat source that didn't require hacking down trees. A quirky or fringe tidbit about medieval fuel involves the use of animal dung as a supplementary fuel source, especially in regions where wood was scarce. Dried cow or horse dung, often mixed with straw, would be formed into patties and left to dry in the sun. Once thoroughly desiccated, these dung cakes could be burned for cooking or heating. While not as efficient or hot as wood, they provided a vital, readily available fuel in times of extreme need. You might wrinkle your nose at the thought, but when your fingers are numb and your stomach growls with hunger, a warm meal cooked over a dung fire would be a blessing. It might add a certain rustic aroma to your stew, but beggars can't be choosers, right? Historians still argue whether the extensive deforestation seen in many parts of medieval Europe was primarily driven by the peasants' desperate need for fuel, or by the lord's demand for timber for construction, shipbuilding, and charcoal production for industries like iron smelting. As you look at the increasingly sparse woodlands surrounding your village, you can see evidence of both. The smaller, coppiced areas speak of your people's daily needs, while the vast, denuded tracts hint at larger, more ambitious projects by the powerful. It makes you wonder how much longer this delicate balance can hold, how much longer the forest can keep giving before it simply gives out. The smell of wood smoke, so acrid and eye-stinging in your hovel, takes on a different quality outside. In the village, it's a constant, comforting presence, a sign that people are alive, fires are burning, and life, however harsh, continues. Each plume of smoke curling from a thatched roof is a tiny flag of defiance against the cold. You learn to read the smoke. A thin, white wisp on a still morning means a slow, steady burn. A thick, black column suggests a newly stoked fire and perhaps damp wood. It's a language of survival, spoken silently across the rooftops. As the snow begins to fall in earnest, covering the ground in a thick, insulating blanket, the task of gathering fuel becomes even more perilous. The forest transforms into a white, silent maze, and the paths become treacherous underfoot. You might sink knee-deep into drifts or slip on hidden ice. The cold seeps into your very bones, and the risk of frostbite becomes very real. Fingers and toes turn white, then ominously gray, and the pain is a dull, relentless throb. You learn to recognize the early signs, to rub your extremities vigorously, to seek the warmth of the hearth as soon as possible. Losing a finger or a toe to the frost is not uncommon, a grim souvenir of a harsh winter. But the alternative, freezing to death, is far worse. So you push on, driven by the primal need for fire, knowing that every log you bring back is another tiny victory against the brutal, unrelenting cold. As the cold deepens, a far more insidious enemy begins to make its presence felt. Hunger. It's not the fleeting rumble in your stomach after skipping a meal, but a constant, gnawing emptiness that settles deep in your gut and permeates every waking thought. The vibrant, bountiful world of summer, with its fields of swaying grain and plump livestock, has retreated, leaving behind a stark landscape of scarcity. You learn to recognize the subtle signs of its approach. The way your neighbors look at you with slightly too keen an eye when food is mentioned, the increasing quietness at meals, the desperate hopeful whispers about the larders holding out. Your entire existence revolves around food. It's not a choice, it's a biological imperative. During the harvest, you worked from sunup to sundown, your body aching, but fueled by the promise of full bellies through the winter. Now, that promise feels thin, stretched taut. The bulk of the harvest, remember, goes to the lord of the manor as rent and tithes. Imagine toiling for months, sweating in the summer sun, only for the vast majority of your yield to be carted away to the lord's granaries, leaving your own much smaller store for your family's survival. It's a bitter pill to swallow, but it's the bedrock of the feudal system you live under. What little grain you manage to keep, mostly barley, oats, or rye, is painstakingly milled, often at the lord's mill, another service for which you owe a fee. This flour, coarse and often riddled with bits of chaff, forms the basis of your diet. Dark bread. It's dense, heavy, and fills your stomach, at least for a little while. You eat it plain or perhaps dipped in a little weak broth. It's not exciting, not delicious by modern standards, but it's sustenance. Every crumb is precious. You wouldn't dream of letting a single morsel go to waste. A dropped piece of bread isn't just a minor inconvenience. It's a small tragedy. Beyond bread, your diet is meager and monotonous. Any vegetables that were successfully stored, root vegetables like carrots, parsnips, turnips, and onions, perhaps some cabbages, or are carefully rationed. They are often stored in underground cellars or pits, covered with straw to protect them from the frost. But even with careful storage, many will rot or freeze. The smell of earthy, damp root vegetables becomes synonymous with winter survival. Meat is a rare luxury. If you're lucky, your family might own a pig, which would have been slaughtered in late autumn. The process is brutal and necessary, a grim ritual that ensures a supply of precious fat and protein. The meat is then preserved through salting or smoking. You can almost taste the intense saltiness of cured bacon or hear the crackle of fat rendering over the fire. These preserved meats are kept for the direst needs, a reserve of energy for the hardest days. Smaller animals, like chickens, might be kept for their eggs, but even egg production slows dramatically in the cold, dark months. Hunting wild game is often forbidden to peasants, reserved for the lord, under penalty of law. You might occasionally poach a rabbit if you're desperate and daring, but the risk is immense. One mainstream historical fact about medieval peasant diet is its heavy reliance on cereals, making up often 70 to 80% of their caloric intake. This meant that a bad harvest could, and often did, lead to widespread famine. You understand this vulnerability acutely. The entire year's efforts, the very fate of your family, hangs on the success of that summer's crops. When the harvest fails, you see the gaunt faces, the desperation in the eyes of your neighbors, and you know what it means. It means the difference between gnawing hunger and outright starvation. A quirky or fringe tidbit about medieval food preservation involves the use of ash from the hearth. Beyond just keeping pests away, wood ash, being alkaline, was sometimes used in rudimentary ways for food preservation, like in making lye for softening grains, nixtamalization, though less common in Europe than in the Americas, or as a component in certain pickling solutions. You might see your mother carefully collect the fine white ash from the cooled hearth, knowing it has many uses beyond merely firekeeping, perhaps even a secret trick or two for making a meager portion last just a little bit longer. It's a testament to how every resource, even seemingly useless byproducts, was pressed into service for survival. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants were perpetually on the brink of starvation, or if they generally managed to subsist adequately, with famines being exceptional, albeit devastating, events. As you tighten your belt, trying to trick your stomach into feeling fuller, you know that while perhaps not constantly starving, the line between sufficiency and utter destitution is remarkably thin. The smallest setback, a sudden illness, a broken tool, an unexpected spell of brutal weather, could push your family over the edge into genuine crisis. Water, too, is a constant concern. The communal well, your source of fresh water, can freeze solid in the bitterest weather. Breaking through the ice is a struggle, requiring brute force and often leaving you with aching muscles and soaked, freezing hands. You might resort to melting snow, a time-consuming process that requires precious fuel and yields surprisingly little water for the effort. You learn to conserve every drop, to reuse water when possible, to understand its fundamental importance. As the days crawl by, the lack of variety in your diet becomes soul-crushing. You dream of rich stews, of fresh fruit, of anything beyond the relentless cycle of dark bread and thin broth. Your body feels perpetually tired, not just from work, but from the constant energy drain of keeping warm and the insufficient calories. Your mind, too, feels duller, less keen. This isn't just about feeling hungry. It's about the deep, pervasive physical and mental exhaustion that comes from chronic undernourishment. The children, particularly, show the signs. Their faces are paler, their eyes a little too large for their hollowed cheeks. You try to share your meager portion to ensure they get enough, but there's only so much to go around. Each meal is a silent act of triage, a desperate hope that you've given just enough to keep everyone going until spring. As if the gnawing hunger and the relentless cold weren't enough, a far more insidious enemy stalks your village during these bitter months: disease. Winter, for the medieval peasant, isn't just about battling the elements. It's about a desperate, often losing, fight against the invisible invaders that thrive in damp, cold, and overcrowded conditions. Your body, already weakened by insufficient food and constant exposure, becomes a welcoming host for every cough, sniffle, and fever that makes its rounds. Deep in your gut, that a simple cough can quickly escalate, and a fever can steal a life with terrifying speed. You live in close quarters, remember, not just with your family but often with your livestock. This immediate proximity to animals, while providing crucial warmth, also means you're sharing their parasites, their fleas, and whatever other microscopic inhabitants they carry. Hygiene, as you know it, is rudimentary at best. Access to clean water is limited, especially when the well freezes, and the concept of washing hands regularly to prevent the spread of illness is utterly foreign. Your clothes, worn day in and day out, become a repository for dirt, sweat, and whatever else you pick up. There's no changing into fresh garments. You simply wear what you have until it literally falls apart. The air in your hovel, thick with wood smoke and the exhalations of bodies and animals, is stagnant and unmoving. Ventilation is poor, limited to the smoke hole and the ever-present drafts. This means that airborne illnesses like the common cold or influenza spread with terrifying efficiency. One person starts coughing, and within days it seems the entire family is hacking and wheezing. The sound of a persistent cough echoing through the flimsy walls of your hovel is a constant, anxiety-inducing soundtrack to winter life. Childbirth, already a perilous endeavor in medieval times, becomes even more dangerous in winter. The cold, the lack of proper nutrition for the mother, and the increased risk of infection make it a grim lottery. Infant mortality rates are tragically high, and a newborn's first winter is a brutal trial by fire, or rather, by ice. You've seen tiny, fragile lives snuffed out by a chill that modern medicine could shrug off with a blanket and some acetaminophen. There's no incubator, no neonatal intensive care unit, just a worried mother, a few rough swaddling cloths, and the desperate prayer for warmth and strength. One mainstream historical fact about disease in the Middle Ages is the prevalence of respiratory illnesses like pneumonia and bronchitis, exacerbated by cold, damp living conditions and constant exposure to smoke from indoor fires. These conditions, which today are often treated with antibiotics, were often deadly for medieval peasants. You can feel the burning in your lungs, the tightness in your chest, and the rattling cough that brings up phlegm. It's a familiar feeling, one that fills you with dread, knowing that it can quickly turn from an inconvenience to a life-threatening struggle. A quirky or fringe tidbit about medieval health and belief involves the concept of winter humors. Medieval medicine, based on the ancient Greek theory of humors, believed that the body was governed by 4 primary fluids: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. Winter, with its cold and dampness, was thought to increase phlegm in the body, leading to an imbalance that could manifest as colds, coughs, and lethargy. To combat this, people might consume warming foods or use remedies designed to dry out the excess phlegm, even if those remedies were more rooted in superstition than science. So, your grandmother might try to feed you a concoction of boiled herbs and perhaps a bit of dried ginger, believing it would literally warm your humors. Historians still argue whether medieval disease outbreaks were solely due to poor hygiene and nutrition, or if early forms of bacterial and viral evolution played a significant, perhaps unrecognized, role in their virulence. As you watch a neighbor succumb to a rapid fever, you can't help but wonder if something new, something more potent than the usual winter maladies, has found its way into your isolated community. The helplessness you feel is profound. Beyond the common cold, other ailments thrive in the winter darkness. Typhus, often spread by lice and fleas, can sweep through a village, leaving a trail of fever, rash, and delirium. The close proximity to animals makes these infestations a constant threat. Dysentery, though often associated with summer's tainted food, can also persist, particularly if water sources become contaminated by melting snow runoff or improper waste disposal. The debilitating cramps and endless trips outside into the freezing air would be a torment beyond imagining. Your only recourse for illness is folk medicine, passed down through generations. Your mother or the village elder might know a few herbal remedies. Willow bark for fever, the natural source of salicylic acid, the active ingredient in aspirin, chamomile for upset stomachs, or poultices of warmed herbs for aches and pains. These are often accompanied by prayers, charms, and rituals, a blend of practical knowledge and deeply ingrained superstition. If a serious illness strikes, like the sweating sickness that ravaged some communities, there's little anyone can do beyond comforting the afflicted and waiting for the grim reaper to pass by. Doctors, as you know them, are non-existent in your village. Only occasionally might a traveling barber surgeon pass through, capable of bleeding or tooth extraction, but little else. The sound of coughing and sneezing becomes a constant background hum in the village, a mournful chorus that speaks of collective suffering. You listen to the sounds emanating from your neighbor's hovels, a child's feverish cry, the rasping breath of an old man, the quiet, exhausted sobs of a mother. Each sound is a painful reminder of your shared vulnerability, a stark confirmation that in this brutal winter, the greatest threat might not be the cold, but the unseen enemies that thrive within it. Survival isn't just about enduring the physical hardship. It's about clinging to hope when all around you, the specter of disease casts a long, chilling shadow. Even if you manage to keep hunger at bay and illness away, another, more constant battle waged against you during the medieval winter, the fight to keep warm, which often came down to the meager protection offered by your clothing. Forget your modern array of waterproof jackets, thermal underwear, and insulated boots. Your medieval wardrobe is astonishingly simple, brutally practical, and utterly inadequate for the conditions you face. You learn to layer not out of fashion, but out of sheer, desperate necessity. Your innermost layer, if you're lucky, is a simple linen tunic or shift. Linen is breathable in summer, but in winter, it offers little warmth, serving mainly as a barrier between your skin and the coarser outer layers. It gets dirty quickly, of course, and washing it is a laborious process involving lye and pounding, rarely undertaken in the freezing temperatures of winter. So you wear it day after day, week after week, until it's stiff with grime and sweat, offering that particular medieval aroma that, well, you just get used to. Over the linen, you pull on your main garment, a woolen tunic or gown. This is the workhorse of your wardrobe. Wool, spun from the sheep raised in your village, is incredibly resilient, warm even when damp, and naturally breathable. But it's also coarse, scratchy against your skin, and heavy. Imagine wearing a perpetually damp, slightly itchy blanket as your primary outfit. That's pretty much it. The sleeves might be long, covering your wrists, and the hem might reach your knees or shins, offering some protection from the biting winds that sweep across the open fields. For your legs, you have brays, which are essentially loose-fitting linen or wool trousers, often tied at the waist and ankles. On top of these, men might wear hose or chausse, separate tubes of fabric pulled up the legs and often tied to your brays or a belt to keep them from slipping down. These are usually made of wool and offer some insulation. For women, a longer tunic or gown serves as both dress and leg covering, though some might wear rudimentary leg wraps underneath. You learn to live with perpetually cold feet, and the constant threat of chilblains, those painful, itchy swellings caused by exposure to cold and damp, becomes a regular nuisance. On your feet, you wear simple leather shoes or turn shoes. These are often soft, unlined leather, turned inside out during construction, then flipped right side out to hide the seams. They offer minimal protection from the cold and absolutely no waterproofing. Imagine stepping into a puddle and feeling the icy water instantly soak through to your socks, if you even have socks, which are usually just foot wraps or crude woolen tubes. In the snow, your feet are perpetually damp and cold, leading to aching toes and the constant fear of frostbite. You might try stuffing straw into your shoes for extra insulation, but it quickly becomes soggy and ineffective. When you venture outside, you add a cloak or a mantle. This is your main defense against the elements. It's typically a large, rectangular or semicircular piece of thick wool, often unhemmed and simply draped over your shoulders, held in place with a pin or tied at the neck. It offers a surprising amount of warmth, especially when pulled tightly around you. You learn to use it as a makeshift blanket, a windbreak, and even a pillow if you have to rest on the ground. It's your most valuable piece of clothing, an extension of your very existence in the winter months. Head coverings are also essential. A simple coif, a close-fitting cap, or a hood attached to your tunic or cloak helps to retain crucial body heat. You know that saying, "You lose most of your heat through your head"? Well, medieval peasants intuitively understood that, even without the science. Protecting your head and ears from the biting wind is a non-negotiable part of daily dressing. One mainstream historical fact about medieval clothing is that wool was by far the most dominant fabric for outer garments due to its warmth, durability, and availability. Different qualities of wool were used, from rough, coarse weaves for peasants to finer cloths for the wealthy. The very texture of your daily life is defined by wool, its scratchiness, its warmth, its particular scent when damp. You can practically feel the fibers against your skin just thinking about it. A quirky or fringe tidbit about medieval winter attire involves the use of animal furs, not just for the nobility, but occasionally by peasants, particularly those with access to hunting or trapping. While expensive furs like ermine or sable were reserved for the elite, common furs like rabbit, squirrel, or even cat, yes, really, could be sewn into the lining of cloaks or hats for extra warmth. Imagine a peasant with a hat lined with a dozen squirrel pelts, not for vanity, but purely for survival against the brutal cold. It was a resourceful way to utilize every part of an animal. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants had distinct winter and summer wardrobes, or if they simply added layers to their existing clothes as the temperature dropped. As you pile on every available scrap of wool and linen, feeling your movements become stiff and cumbersome, you realize that the distinction might have been largely theoretical. You wore what you had, adapting as best you could. There wasn't a seasonal wardrobe change. There was just clothing, and more of it or less of it depending on the day. Your clothes are rarely, if ever, truly clean. The constant exposure to mud, smoke, and general grime means they are perpetually stained and smelly. The idea of a daily shower is utterly absurd. You might wash your face and hands with cold water if you're lucky, but a full body wash is a rare, almost ritualistic event, probably reserved for warmer months, if at all. So, you learn to live with the smell of yourself and the smell of everyone else. It's just the background aroma of medieval existence, the scent of survival. You feel the weight of your layers, the scratch of the wool, the slight dampness that seems to permeate everything, no matter how close you stand to the fire. Your movements are slightly restricted, your body a bundled, muffled shape against the biting winds. But despite the discomfort, despite the itch, despite the constant battle against the cold seeping through every seam, these clothes are your lifeline. They are the thin, woolen membrane that separates you from the freezing, unforgiving world outside, and you cling to them as fiercely as you cling to life itself. When the biting wind seeps through your meager clothing and the fire offers only a small circle of warmth, you instinctively seek out the profound comfort and strategic advantage of communal warmth. Your medieval village isn't just a collection of individual hovels. It's a living, breathing organism, and in winter, its very survival depends on a deep, unspoken understanding of shared resources and collective endurance. You learn, very quickly, that in the face of such relentless cold, loneliness is a luxury you cannot afford. Imagine the long evenings, stretched out by the dwindling daylight. Instead of retreating into solitary corners, families often gather. Your hovel, though small, might host neighbors for a few hours. The more bodies in a confined space, the more heat is generated. The simple physics, but for you, it's a lifeline. You huddle closer, not just for emotional comfort, but for the literal radiating warmth of another human body. This isn't awkward. It's essential. You can feel the slight brush of a shoulder, the soft breathing of a child nearby, the warmth of a hand, and these small contacts offer a subtle reassurance that you are not alone in this desperate struggle. The village tavern or the Lord's hall, if the Lord is benevolent enough to allow peasants temporary access, or if there's a specific communal event, becomes a hub of activity. While your own hovel offers minimal warmth, these larger structures, with their bigger hearths and greater numbers of people, can be comparatively toasty. You might go there to share a simple, thin ale, to listen to stories, or simply to bask in the relative warmth for a few precious hours. The thick smoke, the noise of many voices, the shared body heat, it all creates an atmosphere that, despite the hardship outside, feels almost festive, a temporary respite from the grim reality. These gatherings aren't just social events. They are crucial to maintaining morale and preventing the crushing despair that can accompany isolation and constant cold. Spinning and weaving, vital tasks for creating the wool clothing you rely on, often become communal activities, especially for women. Imagine a group of women, their fingers nimble despite the cold, gathered around a larger hearth, their spinning wheels humming, their needles flashing as they mend and create. The shared warmth of the fire, the focused work, and the quiet chatter create a powerful sense of camaraderie. This collective labor is not only more efficient but also profoundly comforting. You're all contributing to the common good, preparing for the ongoing fight against the cold. And in doing so, you share not just warmth, but burdens and quiet hopes. One mainstream historical fact about communal life in medieval Europe is the importance of the village church or chapel as a central gathering place, especially during winter. While primarily a place of worship, it also served as a meeting point, a source of community news, and often, due to its stone construction and large size, a slightly warmer place than most homes, especially if a brazier or a small fire was allowed. Attending Mass wasn't just a spiritual duty. It was a weekly opportunity for communal gathering, for sharing limited news, and for deriving a sense of collective purpose and solace in a harsh world. A quirky or fringe tidbit about medieval communal life involves the practice of warming stones, or bed-warming stones. While not always communal in the modern sense, the sharing of larger, fire-warmed stones among a household, and perhaps even with a close neighbor, before bed was a common practice. A large, flat stone would be heated thoroughly in the dying embers of the hearth, then wrapped in cloth and taken to bed. The warmth would radiate for hours, a simple but effective way to warm cold feet and bodies. Sometimes, a particularly well-heated stone might be shared between two families if one had a dying fire and the other a particularly cold dwelling, a silent act of medieval kindness. It's a bit like a primitive hot water bottle, only much heavier and probably more likely to give you a third-degree burn if you weren't careful. Historians still argue whether the close-knit nature of medieval peasant communities fostered genuine social equality within their ranks, or if existing hierarchies, based on land ownership, family lineage, or skill, persisted even in shared hardship. As you share a simple meal around a neighbor's fire, you feel the bonds of mutual dependence, but you're also keenly aware of the subtle differences. The family with a bit more stored grain, the one with a healthier pig, the elder whose wisdom commands respect. There's an undeniable sense of we're all in this together, but that doesn't necessarily mean everyone suffers equally or is equally powerful. The soundscape of winter shifts from the individual struggle within your hovel to the collective murmurs of the village. You hear the lowing of livestock from a nearby byre, the distant echo of an axe chopping wood, the occasional bark of a dog, and the muted voices of neighbors as they go about their chores. These sounds, normally background noise, now become vital signs of life, reassurance that the community is still functioning, still breathing, still enduring. The lack of artificial light means that communal life often slows dramatically after dusk, but the hours spent together, even in dim light, are profoundly important. Storytelling, riddles, and simple songs become the entertainment of choice during these long, dark evenings. Without books or electricity, oral traditions flourish. Elders recount tales of past winters, legends of heroes, and humorous anecdotes that bring a rare moment of genuine laughter. These stories aren't just diversions. They are repositories of shared knowledge, moral lessons, and a vital means of passing on cultural heritage. They also serve to psychologically transport you, for a brief time, beyond the cold walls of your hovel and the gnawing anxiety of winter. You listen, mesmerized, as the flames flicker and shadows dance, momentarily forgetting the chill seeping into your bones. It's a reminder that even in the harshest conditions, the human spirit finds ways to connect, to share, to find joy, however fleeting. As the medieval winter tightens its grip, your small, drafty hovel becomes not just a shelter for your human family, but also a vital sanctuary for your animal companions. These are not pets in the modern sense, not pampered creatures on plush beds. No, these are your living, breathing, often smelly insurance policy against starvation, your source of warmth, and an integral part of your medieval survival strategy. The bond you have with them is forged in the crucible of necessity, a quiet understanding of mutual dependence. Your most valuable animal assets are likely your pigs. These remarkable creatures are often kept within the hovel itself during the harshest months, or in an adjoining byre that shares a wall with your living space. Why? Because a pig, even a relatively small one, generates a surprising amount of body heat. Imagine a living, breathing, grunting radiator in the corner of your single-room home. It's certainly not glamorous, and the smell can be potent, but when the temperatures plummet below freezing, that animal warmth is invaluable. You might even feel the subtle vibration of their snores through the rough straw on your floor, a strange lullaby of survival. Beyond warmth, the pigs represent your family's most significant source of protein and fat for the lean winter months. They are typically slaughtered in late autumn, a grim but necessary ritual that ensures a supply of meat, bacon, and lard. Every part of the animal is utilized, nothing is wasted. The blood might be used for blood puddings, the entrails for sausages, the fat rendered down for cooking and candles. The memory of the slaughter, the squeals, the hot blood, is visceral, but it's quickly followed by the profound relief of knowing you have a precious store of food that could mean the difference between life and death. Then there are your chickens. While they don't provide as much direct warmth as a pig, their eggs are a vital source of protein when other food sources dwindle. Egg production, however, slows dramatically in the colder, darker months. You learn to appreciate every single egg, handling it with extreme care. You might see your mother gently tucking a still warm egg into a basket lined with straw, treating it like a fragile jewel. In a time of scarcity, even a single egg can feel like a feast, a small victory against the relentless hunger. The chickens themselves, often allowed to scratch around the hovel's dirt floor, are also a source of meat, though usually only for dire necessity or a very rare special occasion. Your cow or ox, if your family is fortunate enough to own one, is even more precious. It's your draft animal, essential for plowing the fields come spring. Its milk, though diminished in winter, provides crucial calories and nutrients, especially for children. Like the pigs, cattle might be brought into an attached byre during the coldest nights, their sheer size generating a significant amount of heat. Imagine the gentle lowing of your cow, a deep, comforting sound in the darkness, a reminder of the living wealth you possess. This isn't just an animal. It's a partner in your labor and a lifeline for your family. Sheep, if you have them, are valued primarily for their wool. The shearing season is in spring, but their presence is felt year-round. Their fleeces are shorn, cleaned, carded, and spun into the rough, warm woolen cloth that makes up your entire wardrobe. Even in winter, a small flock of sheep huddled together in an outdoor pen or a simple shelter offers a slight, if distant, contribution to the communal warmth of the village, their soft bleating a familiar sound. One mainstream historical fact about medieval peasant life is that livestock ownership was a significant marker of wealth and social standing, even within the peasant class. A family with a few pigs, chickens, and perhaps a cow was considered relatively prosperous compared to those who owned nothing but their meager tools and the clothes on their backs. Your family's survival, and your prospects for the coming year, are intimately tied to the health and productivity of your animals. A quirky or fringe tidbit regarding medieval animal care is the belief in animal charms, or specific rituals to protect livestock from winter ailments and evil spirits. These might involve hanging bundles of dried herbs in the byre, scattering salt, or even reciting specific incantations over the animals. While modern science would scoff, these practices offered a sense of control and hope in a world where disease could decimate a flock or herd without warning, leaving a family utterly destitute. You might see your father tying a red ribbon around the neck of the cow, a small, hopeful gesture against the unseen forces of ill fortune. Historians still argue whether the high mortality rates among medieval livestock during harsh winters were primarily due to lack of adequate feed and shelter, or if endemic diseases among domesticated animals played a more significant and unavoidable role. As you watch your best pig cough, a tightness clenches in your chest. You worry about every sniffle, every patch of ruffled feathers, knowing that one sick animal could jeopardize your family's fragile existence. The vet, of course, isn't a profession you've ever heard of. You rely on generations of accumulated folk wisdom, desperate prayers, and perhaps a few ineffective herbal poultices. The sounds of the animals become deeply ingrained in your daily life. The soft clucking of the chickens as they peck at stray grains on the floor, the deep, resonant grunts of the pig, the occasional lowing of the cow, these aren't just noises. They are the sounds of your survival. They are a constant reminder of the fragile ecosystem you are a part of, where every living creature has a role to play in the collective struggle against the harshness of winter. You feed them carefully, rationing their meager portions of fodder, knowing that their well-being directly impacts your own. Despite the smells, the noise, and the constant threat of disease, there's a profound comfort in their presence. In the dead of night, when the wind howls like a hungry wolf outside and the cold seeps through every crack, the warmth of a pig snuffling in the corner, the rhythmic chewing of a cow, or the soft rustle of chickens on their perch is a powerful reassurance. They are your silent, living partners in this struggle, and their survival is inextricably linked to your own. You pat the coarse hide of your cow, a gesture of thanks and hope, knowing that together, you will face the long, cold darkness, and together, you hope, you will see the spring. Amidst the relentless grind of hunger, cold, and disease, there are rare, precious moments that puncture the grim monotony of the medieval winter, the winter feasts. These aren't lavish banquets by any stretch of the imagination, not the kind of opulent displays you might associate with kings and queens. For you, the medieval peasant, a feast is a brief, intense burst of relative abundance, a communal celebration designed to bolster spirits, solidify social bonds, and offer a fleeting taste of something richer, more satisfying than your daily gruel. They are vital psychological anchors in a sea of hardship. The most significant winter feast, of course, is Christmas, or Yuletide, its pagan precursor, which deeply influenced the medieval Christian holiday. This is the absolute peak of the winter celebrations, a period that might stretch over several days. Imagine the anticipation building, the quiet excitement rippling through the village. It's a time when, if possible, families might slaughter a carefully preserved pig, or perhaps pool resources to butcher a fatter goose or a few chickens. The smell of roasting meat, a scent almost forgotten since the last autumn, would waft through the village, a heady perfume promising a brief reprieve from scarcity. The lord of the manor might even hold a feast, a grander affair to which his peasants, or at least the more prominent villagers, might be invited to his hall. This isn't charity entirely. It's a display of his benevolence, a reaffirmation of his power, and a way to maintain social order. You might sit on rough benches eating a simple but still generous meal, perhaps even receiving a small gift of ale or a portion of bread. The light and warmth of the Lord's great hall, even for a few hours, would feel like stepping into another world, a temporary escape from your drafty hovel. The sheer volume of people, the sound of music, even if it's just a simple pipe or drum, the flicker of countless candles, it would be an overwhelming sensory experience after months of dimness and quiet struggle. Beyond Christmas, there might be smaller, less formalized feasts, perhaps to mark a successful communal effort, a wedding that had to wait for winter's relative lull in agricultural work, or even just a particularly cold stretch that demanded a morale boost. These often take place in a larger hovel or the village communal house, if one exists. Everyone brings what little they can contribute. A few dried apples, a lump of salted pork, a bit of precious cheese, some home-brewed ale. It's a potluck of survival, where the act of sharing is as important as the food itself. The food, though simple, would be a revelation. Imagine a thick stew simmered for hours, brimming with whatever vegetables managed to last through storage, perhaps a few scraps of preserved meat, and thickened with precious grain. It would be savory, hot, and utterly satisfying. The simple pleasure of a full, warm stomach, even for one evening, is almost intoxicating. You might even have a small piece of honey cake if honey was harvested successfully in the summer, or some dried fruit, a taste of sweetness in a bitter world. These treats are incredibly rare, cherished for their fleeting indulgence. One mainstream historical fact about medieval feasting is that ale or cider, depending on the region and available crops, was the primary drink, consumed in vast quantities by all ages, as water sources were often unreliable or contaminated. While stronger alcoholic beverages existed, ale was a staple, providing calories and a safe hydration source. Imagine the sense of conviviality as wooden tankards are passed around, the warmth of the ale spreading through your belly, momentarily dulling the aches and worries. It's not just about getting tipsy. It's about communal warmth, shared calories, and a temporary blurring of the harsh realities. A quirky or fringe tidbit about medieval winter feasts involves the tradition of wassailing. This practice, particularly common in apple-growing regions, involved going out to apple orchards, often with noise and singing, to wassail the trees, to wish them good health and a bountiful harvest in the coming year. Sometimes, people would pour ale on the tree roots or hang toast in the branches to appease tree spirits. While seemingly pagan, it seamlessly blended into Christian winter festivities, a desperate, joyful plea to the earth to awaken and provide again. Imagine a small procession, lanterns flickering in the snow, singing boisterously to a dormant apple tree, hoping to coax it into fruitfulness. Historians still argue whether these communal feasts truly mitigated the effects of winter scarcity, or if they were primarily symbolic gestures designed to maintain social cohesion in the face of widespread hardship. As you feel the warmth of the ale and the fullness in your belly, you know that while it won't magically banish the hunger for the rest of winter, the psychological boost is immeasurable. It reminds you that joy, however fleeting, is still possible, and that the community is a source of strength, not just individual struggle. Beyond food and drink, these feasts are rich in storytelling and music. Without books or widespread literacy, oral traditions thrive. Elders recount tales of heroes, myths of creation, and humorous anecdotes, their voices weaving magic in the firelight. Simple instruments, a pipe, a drum, a crude stringed instrument, might provide a rhythmic backdrop. You learn that laughter, too, is a form of warmth, a vital release that momentarily makes the crushing weight of winter bearable. The shared jokes, the collective sigh of contentment after a rare full meal, the warmth of bodies pressed together, these are the true luxuries of a medieval winter feast. As the feast winds down, and you make your way back to your cold hovel, the residual warmth from the food and drink, and the glow of communal camaraderie, stays with you. It's a memory you'll cling to in the long, dark nights to come. A flicker of hope that the spring will indeed return, bringing with it the promise of abundance. These feasts are not just about survival. They are about living through winter, about refusing to let the cold steal your spirit, about finding moments of light in the deepest darkness. They are an affirmation of life in the face of death, a defiant celebration of human resilience. When illness strikes in your medieval hovel, there are no doctors to call, no pharmacies to visit, no miracle cures to be found. Your only hope lies in the realm of medical miseries, a blend of folk wisdom, rudimentary herbal remedies, deeply ingrained superstitions, and the desperate resilience of your own body. You quickly learn that pain is a constant companion, and healing is a slow, uncertain process, often more reliant on luck and a strong constitution than any intervention. The most common ailments are, as you've felt, respiratory. For a persistent cough or a fever, your mother or grandmother might brew you a strong herbal tea from dried elderflowers, chamomile, or coltsfoot, believing these would soothe the chest or sweat out the illness. The taste is bitter, the smell earthy, but you swallow it obediently, clinging to the hope it might offer some relief. Sometimes, they might apply a poultice, a paste made from crushed herbs, sometimes mixed with lard or honey, warmed and applied to the chest or a swollen joint. The warmth feels good, but whether it truly draws out the illness is anyone's guess. Fevers are particularly terrifying. Without thermometers, the only way to gauge severity is by touch, by the flush of skin, the delirium in the eyes. For a high fever, you might be wrapped in cool, damp cloths, or even immersed in a cold bath. A shock to the system that could either break the fever or send you spiraling into an even worse state. Bloodletting, a popular practice among the educated and largely ineffective physicians of the time, is rarely practiced by peasants themselves, who are too valuable to risk weakening through such methods. But you might hear of it as a treatment for the lord or his family, a strange, elite custom. Broken bones are a brutal reality. A fall on icy ground, a misstep while carrying heavy with these simple accidents can have catastrophic consequences. There's no X-ray, no cast. If you're lucky, someone in the village has a knack for setting bones, splinting them with pieces of wood and wrapping them tightly with strips of cloth. The pain is excruciating, and the healing process is agonizingly slow, often leaving you with a permanently crooked limb or a chronic ache that acts as a grim reminder of winter's perils. Infections, of course, are a constant threat to any open wound. For aches and pains, particularly the stiffness that comes with cold and damp, various folk remedies are employed. Rubbing the affected area with animal fat, sometimes infused with herbs, is common. Sometimes a wise woman in the village, a sort of local healer, might be consulted. She knows which plants to gather, which roots to dig, and which leaves to boil. Her knowledge is passed down through generations, a precious repository of practical, if unscientific, remedies. She might also employ charms, prayers, or incantations, blurring the line between medicine and magic. One mainstream historical fact about medieval medicine is the widespread use of herbal remedies, which formed the backbone of peasant healthcare. Many of these plants, like willow bark, containing salicin, a precursor to aspirin, indeed possessed genuine medicinal properties, though their efficacy was often misunderstood or attributed to supernatural forces. Your remedies are born of necessity and observation, the accumulation of centuries of trial and error, not scientific understanding. A quirky or fringe tidbit about medieval healing practices involves the use of sympathetic magic or amulets for protection against illness. For instance, carrying certain stones, wearing specific animal teeth, or even keeping particular plants under your pillow was believed to ward off disease or aid recovery. You might see a child wearing a small bag of dried herbs around their neck, or an old woman with a curious, polished stone clutched in her hand, believing it holds protective powers against the winter agues. It's a desperate attempt to exert some control over an uncontrollable world. Historians still argue whether the overall health outcomes for medieval peasants were more influenced by their diet and living conditions, or by the actual effectiveness or ineffectiveness of the medical treatments available to them. As you shiver with a fever, or wince at the dull throb of an aching joint, you realize that all these factors are intertwined. A weak body, poorly fed and constantly cold, is far more susceptible to illness, and far less capable of fighting it off, no matter how potent the herbal brew or how sincere the prayer. Dental hygiene is practically non-existent. Toothaches are a common, agonizing misery. Without access to dentists, the only solution for a truly bad tooth is extraction, often performed by the village blacksmith or a particularly strong and brave neighbor, using crude tools like pliers. The pain would be immense, the risk of infection high, and the memory of it enough to make you dread even a slight twinge in your jaw. Many people simply learn to live with decaying teeth, enduring the constant ache as another part of life's burden. The death rate, particularly among the very young and the very old, skyrockets during winter. Funerals become more frequent, grim reminders of winter's toll. The sight of a small, shrouded body being carried to the frozen earth, or the somber faces of neighbors gathering to mourn an elder, instills a deep sense of vulnerability. These are not statistics to you. They are your friends, your family, your community members, lost to the relentless chill and the diseases it brings. You learn to live with grief, to carry it as another heavy layer on your already burdened shoulders. But still, you endure, you fight, you brew your teas, you apply your poultices, and you pray, hoping against hope that you and your loved ones will see the spring. As the days dwindle to their shortest, and the sun becomes a pale, fleeting memory, you truly begin to understand the tyranny of the long night. This isn't just about darkness. It's about a profound lack of light, both literal and metaphorical, that settles over your medieval village, stretching endlessly, testing your very sanity. Without electricity, without modern illumination, the hours after sunset become an almost impenetrable void, broken only by the flickering, smoky efforts of your hearth fire. You rise before dawn, roused by the biting chill that penetrates even the thickest blankets. The world outside your hovel is a symphony of subtle sounds. The crunch of frozen earth underfoot, the distant howl of the wind, the rustle of straw as your animals stir. As the sun grudgingly makes its appearance, a dull glow on the horizon, it feels less like a sunrise and more like a concession. The light is weak, diffused by heavy cloud cover or the thick, insulating blanket of snow. You hurry through your morning chores, keenly aware of the precious few hours of daylight that lie ahead. By mid-afternoon, the light begins to fade again, the shadows lengthening ominously. The sky takes on that deep, bruised purple that signals the impending descent into gloom. You feel a quiet urgency, a need to complete as many outdoor tasks as possible before the inevitable. Chopping wood, fetching water, tending to the animals. Everything must be done with speed and efficiency. The cold, damp air drains your energy, making every movement an effort. Once the sun dips below the horizon, the world outside your hovel becomes a place of profound, almost terrifying darkness. There are no streetlights, no glow from distant towns. The only light comes from the scattered, faint glows of hearth fires visible through smoke holes, or the occasional bobbing lantern carried by a neighbor brave enough to venture out. You learn to navigate by memory and touch, your eyes constantly straining to perceive shapes in the gloom. The silence can be equally oppressive, broken only by the howl of the wind or the unsettling creaks and groans of your hovel in the cold. Inside, your primary source of light is the hearth fire. It casts dancing shadows on the wattle and daub walls, creating an intimate, if smoke-filled, space. You gather around it, not just for warmth, but for its precious illumination. Activities that require light, mending clothes, preparing certain foods, carving tools, are performed close to the flames. The smoke, remember, often fills the room before finding its way out, making your eyes sting and your throat scratchy. But you endure it because the alternative is utter darkness. For finer work, or when the fire isn't bright enough, you might use a tallow candle or a rushlight. Tallow candles, made from animal fat, are greasy, smoky, and provide a dim, flickering light that barely pushes back the gloom. Rushlights are even simpler. A dried rush, a type of plant, dipped in grease. They burn quickly and with a weak flame, but they are cheap and accessible. Imagine trying to thread a needle or examine a splinter under such meager illumination. It's a test of patience and eyesight. The cost of even these simple lights means they are used sparingly, for essential tasks only. One mainstream historical fact about medieval illumination is that the vast majority of time, after sunset, peasants lived in near total darkness, relying solely on firelight. The concept of continuous, bright illumination after dark was simply not conceivable, even for the wealthy. This fundamental difference shaped daily routines, social interactions, and even cognitive experiences. Your perception of time, of the world, is intrinsically linked to the cycles of light and dark. A quirky or fringe tidbit about medieval darkness involves the folk belief in night hags, or other malevolent spirits that were thought to roam after dark, particularly in winter. These entities were often associated with dreams, sleep paralysis, or sudden illnesses that struck during the night. People might sleep with charms or prayers near their beds, or turn objects upside down, believing it would confuse or deter these nocturnal visitors. So, when a sudden chill permeates your hovel or an unsettling noise echoes outside, your mind, steeped in generations of such tales, might immediately jump to the supernatural. Historians still argue whether the prolonged periods of darkness during medieval winters contributed to higher rates of seasonal affective disorder, SAD, or other psychological stresses among the population, or if their deep spiritual beliefs and communal bonds offered sufficient psychological resilience. As the endless night stretches before you, sometimes the sheer weight of it feels crushing. The quiet desperation, the feeling of being trapped by the cold and the dark, can be almost as debilitating as physical hunger. The long nights are a time for introspection, for storytelling, and for a deep reliance on the rhythms of your own body. Sleep, when it comes, is often fragmented. The cold might wake you, or the need to tend the fire. You might drift in and out of consciousness, experiencing a form of biphasic sleep, waking in the middle of the night for an hour or two before falling back asleep. These hours of first sleep and second sleep are often described in medieval texts, a natural response to the lack of artificial light. In the quiet hours of the middle night, you might tend to a sick child, pray, or simply stare into the embers, contemplating the precariousness of your existence. The sounds of the night are magnified in the darkness. The scurrying of mice in the thatch, the distant hoot of an owl, the shifting of snow on the roof. Every sound seems sharper, more resonant. You learn to distinguish between the mundane sounds of your hovel and the more unsettling noises from outside, though sometimes your imagination can play tricks on you in the profound gloom. The darkness is not empty. It's filled with unseen presences, both real and imagined. This relentless, all-encompassing darkness is a core element of your winter experience. It dictates when you work, when you rest, and how you interact with your world. It forces you inward, both physically and mentally. But it also highlights the preciousness of light and the profound relief that washes over you with the first, hesitant promise of dawn, a reminder that even the longest night must eventually yield to the rising sun. When the relentless cold, gnawing hunger, and oppressive darkness threaten to crush your spirit, you, the medieval peasant, instinctively turn to spiritual solace. In a world without modern medicine, without abundant food, and without reliable warmth, faith isn't just a comfort. It's a foundational pillar of your existence, offering meaning, hope, and a sense of order in a chaotic, often terrifying, world. Your belief system, deeply intertwined with every aspect of daily life, becomes a vital tool for enduring the long, brutal winter. The village church, small and often cold, is nevertheless the spiritual heart of your community. Attending Mass, particularly on Sundays and feast days like Christmas, is a non-negotiable part of your life. Imagine stepping into the dimly lit interior, the cold stone walls echoing with the Latin chants of the priest, a language you might not fully understand but whose rhythms and solemnity still deeply affect you. The scent of incense, the flicker of a few precious candles on the altar, the shared murmurs of prayer, these sensory experiences create a powerful sense of awe and communal belonging. You pray for a successful harvest, for the health of your family and livestock, and for deliverance from the perils of winter. You understand that your fate is largely in the hands of divine providence. When sickness sweeps through the village, you turn to prayer and the intercession of saints. When the snow falls too heavily, threatening your stored food, you pray for a thaw. This isn't a passive faith. It's an active, desperate plea to a higher power, a constant dialogue with the unseen forces that govern your world. The lives of saints, particularly those associated with protection or healing, become deeply significant. You might have a small, crudely carved wooden figurine of your patron saint in your hovel, or wear a simple, blessed medallion. Saint Sebastian, often invoked against plague, or Saint Blaise, for throat ailments, might be especially popular during winter when illness is rampant. These aren't just figures in stories. They are powerful intercessors, believed to offer direct protection and aid in times of need. Beyond formal church services, personal devotion is crucial. You might say simple prayers before meals, before starting a chore, or before going to sleep. The rosary, or a simpler form of counting prayers, might be a common practice. You carry your faith with you, a constant inner dialogue, a source of strength when external conditions are at their worst. The idea of doubt or a purely secular existence would be almost incomprehensible to you. One mainstream historical fact about medieval spiritual life is the profound importance of relics. Pieces of bone, hair, or clothing associated with saints were believed to possess miraculous powers of healing and protection. While most peasants wouldn't have access to major relics, smaller, local churches might have their own, and pilgrimage to shrines holding such relics was a powerful act of faith, often undertaken with immense hardship, even in winter. Imagine the stories of miraculous cures associated with such relics, keeping hope alive in the grimmest of circumstances. A quirky or fringe tidbit about medieval spiritual practices involves the belief in protective blessings for tools and homes. Priests might bless agricultural implements before planting, or sprinkle holy water in homes to ward off evil spirits and ensure prosperity. In winter, this might extend to blessing the hearth to ensure it burns brightly and wards off cold, or blessing the granary to protect the stored grain from spoilage and vermin. You might see your father making the sign of the cross over his axe before heading into the freezing woods, or your mother muttering a prayer as she places the last loaf of bread into the storage bin. Historians still argue whether the widespread belief in divine intervention and miracles in medieval society fostered a sense of fatalism, leading to less proactive attempts to improve material conditions, or if it provided the necessary psychological resilience to endure and even thrive despite immense hardship. As you offer a heartfelt prayer for your sick child, knowing there's little else you can do, you feel both the profound helplessness and the comforting conviction that you are not utterly alone, that there is a purpose, however inscrutable, to your suffering. The liturgical calendar heavily influences the rhythms of winter. Advent, leading up to Christmas, is a period of fasting and reflection, paradoxically followed by the most significant feast. Lent, preceding Easter, is another period of intense fasting and penitence, often made even more arduous by the lingering scarcity of late winter. These cycles of feasting and fasting are not just religious obligations. They are deeply ingrained patterns that structure your year, providing a spiritual framework for the seasonal realities of abundance and scarcity. Sermons, delivered in the vernacular, often serve as a vital source of moral guidance, community news, and even rudimentary education. The priest, often the most educated person in the village, interprets scripture, explains complex theological concepts, and reminds you of your duties to God, to your Lord, and to your fellow villagers. These sermons, heard in the cold church, are a constant reinforcement of the social and spiritual order, providing a sense of meaning to your difficult life. Ultimately, spiritual solace in medieval winter is about hope. It's the belief that despite the present suffering, there is a benevolent plan, a promise of salvation, and the eventual return of warmth and plenty. When the nights are long and the hunger sharp, and death lurks around every corner, it is this unwavering faith that gives you the strength to push through another day, another week, another month, clinging to the promise of spring and the hope of eternal salvation beyond the earthly trials. It's a quiet strength, but in the face of medieval winter, it is perhaps the most powerful force of all. Even as the brutal cold and the deep darkness of winter enforce a period of relative dormancy, life for the medieval peasant is never truly idle. While the demanding rhythms of agricultural labor might pause, there remains an unwavering necessity for winter's work. These aren't the sun-drenched, back-breaking efforts of harvest, but rather a different kind of relentless toil, tasks essential for immediate survival, for maintaining your meager belongings, and for preparing, however cautiously, for the eventual return of spring. One of the most crucial winter chores, as you've already experienced, is the ceaseless search for firewood. This isn't a one-time activity. It's a daily, grinding effort that continues throughout the coldest months. Every morning, after the meager breakfast, you or a member of your family must venture into the freezing, often snow-covered, forest to gather more fuel. This might involve breaking off dead branches, hauling fallen logs back to the hovel, or clearing paths to access new areas of the woodland. Your hands ache, your fingers sting, and the cold seems to seep into your very bones. But the alternative, a fireless hearth, is unimaginable. Animal care intensifies in winter. Your precious livestock, vital for your survival, require constant attention. You must ensure they are fed, despite dwindling fodder supplies. This might involve carefully rationing hay saved from the summer, or even finding alternative, less palatable forage. Their enclosures, whether inside your hovel or in an adjacent byre, need to be cleaned of their accumulated waste, a cold and messy job. You also have to protect them from illness and the severe cold, perhaps by providing extra straw bedding or checking regularly for signs of frostbite or disease. A sick animal is a catastrophe in waiting. For women and often children, textile work dominates the indoor hours. The long, dark evenings are spent spinning wool into yarn, often by the flickering light of the hearth or a dim candle. Imagine the rhythmic hum of the spinning wheel, or the quiet, focused movements of fingers drafting fibers from a distaff. This yarn then needs to be woven into cloth on a simple loom, or knitted into socks, mittens, or caps. Clothes wear out quickly in your harsh life, and new garments are constantly needed to replace threadbare tunics and cloaks. Mending is also an endless task. Every tear, every hole is carefully patched and stitched, extending the life of your precious, inadequate wardrobe. It's a never-ending cycle of creation and repair, essential for keeping your family clothed and warm. Maintenance of tools and implements is another vital winter activity. Your simple wooden plows, hoes, axes, and shovels are your most valuable possessions, essential for future agricultural work. Winter is the time to repair handles, sharpen blades if you have access to a grinding stone, and generally ensure everything is in working order for the spring planting season. This is often men's work, a quiet, focused task performed by the warmth of the fire, the metallic scrape of sharpening against stone, a familiar sound. One mainstream historical fact about winter work is that many medieval peasant communities engaged in crafts or cottage industries during the colder months to supplement their agricultural income. This could include basket weaving from willow or hazel, making simple wooden utensils, carving small objects, or even rudimentary blacksmithing if someone in the village possessed the skill and tools. These activities not only provided useful goods but also offered a vital trickle of income or goods for barter when agricultural produce was scarce. A quirky or fringe tidbit about medieval winter work involves the communal activity of rush collecting and preparing. Rushes, a type of plant, were not only used for rushlights but also extensively for flooring, bedding, and even insulation. Peasants would venture out in the cold to gather these rushes, often in marshy areas, then bring them back to dry. The preparation, stripping, drying, and sometimes even dipping them in fat for light, was a time-consuming but essential winter chore. Imagine your fingers, numb with cold, carefully stripping hundreds of rushes in the dim light. Historians still argue whether the apparent downtime of winter truly allowed medieval peasants significant rest and recuperation, or if the sheer volume of essential non-agricultural tasks meant they were constantly engaged in arduous labor, simply shifted indoors. As you mend a tear in your tunic by flickering firelight, or feel the ache in your back from hauling wood, you know that while the rhythms change, the demands on your body certainly do not lessen. Rest feels like a concept, not a reality. Food preparation, though involving meager ingredients, still requires significant effort. Drying what little herbs you have, preparing and salting any remaining meat, or grinding grain takes time and energy. Water, too, needs to be fetched, often involving breaking ice at the well or melting snow over the fire, a process that consumes precious fuel. Every meal is a logistical challenge, a careful balancing act of available resources and necessary labor. Social activities, as mentioned, also play a part, though they too often have a productive element. Storytelling, while entertaining, also transmits vital knowledge and cultural values. Communal gatherings for spinning or mending combine social interaction with necessary labor. Even religious observances, while spiritual, offer a structure and routine that can be seen as a form of mental work, providing focus and resilience. Ultimately, winter's work is about survival. It's about minimizing the impact of the cold, maximizing the use of scarce resources, and preparing for the future. There is no true idleness, no prolonged period of rest. You are constantly engaged in a silent, desperate battle against the elements, a tireless effort to keep your family warm, fed, and alive until the grudging retreat of winter finally signals the return of spring's demanding, but more hopeful labors. Among all the struggles of medieval winter, The most heart-wrenching is witnessing the plight of the children. They are the most vulnerable members of your community. Their small, developing bodies least equipped to withstand the relentless cold, the gnawing hunger, and the insidious diseases that run rampant through the village. Their survival is a daily miracle, and their suffering is a constant, quiet agony for every parent. Imagine your own child, perhaps a toddler, bundled in layers of coarse wool, their face pale and pinched with cold. Their movements are slower, less energetic than in summer, their laughter less frequent and more subdued. You watch them shiver despite your best efforts, their little hands and feet perpetually cold to the touch. The hovel's dampness and drafts seem to seek them out, clinging to their small forms, making them susceptible to every cough and sniffle that passes through the air. Food, already scarce for adults, is even more critical for growing children. While you try desperately to give them the best portions, to ensure they get enough, the reality is that hunger touches them too, perhaps even more cruelly. Their bellies might swell slightly from malnutrition, their hair may thin, and their eyes, once bright and curious, can take on a dull, faraway look. You might try to supplement their diet with a few precious drops of milk from the cow, or a rare egg, but it's often not enough. Their cries of hunger are the hardest to bear, tearing at your very soul. Disease, as you know, is a silent killer in winter, and it preys mercilessly on the young. Childhood illnesses that are now easily treatable, like measles or whooping cough, are often death sentences. Their fragile immune systems, weakened by cold and insufficient nutrition, simply cannot fight off the infections. You live in constant dread of a child developing a fever, a persistent cough, or becoming listless. The sound of a child struggling for breath is a sound that will haunt you long after the winter has passed, a brutal reminder of your helplessness. Infant mortality rates are tragically high, and it is not uncommon for a family to lose several children before they reach adulthood. The grief is deep, but also normalized, a part of the grim reality of life. Play, essential for a child's development, becomes limited and muted. Outdoor play in the snow is dangerous due to the cold, and inside the hovel, space is cramped and light is dim. Children spend more time huddled by the hearth, listening to stories, helping with small chores like sorting rushes or mending, or simply watching the adults. Their games are quieter, often involving simple homemade toys, perhaps a carved wooden animal, a rag doll, or a collection of stones. Imagination becomes their most valuable plaything, allowing them to escape the harsh realities, if only for a few moments. One mainstream historical fact about medieval childhood is that children were considered small adults from a relatively young age, often beginning to contribute to household chores and farm work as early as 5 or 6 years old. There was no concept of a protected, prolonged period of childhood as we understand it. During winter, even the smallest hands could be put to use, fetching twigs for the fire, spinning yarn, or caring for younger siblings. Their labor, however small, was essential to the family's survival. A quirky or fringe tidbit about medieval children in winter involves the practice of first snow rituals. In some regions, when the first significant snowfall occurred, children might be given a special, small treat or a warm drink, or allowed to stay up a little later by the fire for storytelling, as a way to acknowledge the turning of the season and prepare them, psychologically, for the hardships to come. It was a bittersweet moment, a small joy mingled with the grim recognition of the long, cold months ahead. Historians still argue whether the high child mortality rates in medieval Europe led to a different emotional attachment to children by parents, or if the deep love and grief felt by medieval parents were simply expressed differently due to the constant presence of death. As you watch your child sleep, their small chest rising and falling beneath the rough blankets, your love for them is a fierce, primal thing, a desperate hope that they will survive to see another spring, another harvest, another year. The constant worry, the unspoken fear, is a heavy burden carried by every parent. Education for peasant children is entirely practical and experiential. There are no schools. They learn by doing, by observing, by imitating the adults around them. In winter, this might mean learning to identify different types of wood for fuel, understanding the signs of illness in animals, or mastering simple weaving techniques. Storytelling by the fire, as mentioned, is also a vital form of education, transmitting history, morality, and practical wisdom through narrative. The psychological toll on children is immense. The constant cold, the perpetual hunger, the sight of illness and death. These experiences shape their worldview from a very young age. They learn resilience, resourcefulness, and a profound understanding of life's precariousness. But they also experience fear, sadness, and a sense of vulnerability that modern children can barely comprehend. You see it in their quietness, in their sometimes too serious eyes, in the way they cling to moments of warmth and comfort. Yet, even in the depths of winter, children find ways to be children. A rare burst of sunshine might bring them tumbling out of the hovel to make a snow figure, or slide down a small hill on a piece of wood. A particularly well-told story might elicit giggles. Their resilience is astonishing, a testament to the human spirit's ability to find light even in the darkest corners. You watch them, these tiny, fragile beings, and they are your most powerful motivation. Their survival is the driving force behind every log you haul, every meager meal you prepare, every prayer you utter. They are the future, and their small, shivering presence reminds you why you must endure, why you must survive, no matter how brutal the medieval winter becomes. In the face of relentless cold, gnawing hunger, and pervasive disease, your survival as a medieval peasant hinges on more than just brute strength or stoic endurance. It requires an innate ingenuity, a constant, often unconscious, adaptation, and a deep understanding of your environment. You are a master of survival strategies, improvising and innovating with the meager resources at hand, transforming everyday objects into life-saving tools, and finding clever ways to eke out existence where modern sensibilities would simply see despair. Consider the art of layering and insulation, not as a fashion choice, but as a scientific principle. You understand that air trapped between layers of cloth provides warmth. So, you don't just put on one tunic. You might wear 2 or 3, stuffing straw or dried leaves into any gaps in your clothing or around your bed for extra insulation. Your straw mattress isn't just for sleeping. It's a vital layer of warmth between you and the cold earth floor. You learn to make small adjustments, to pull a blanket tighter, to shift your position closer to the hearth, to instinctively find the warmest spot in the hovel. Food preservation, beyond salting and smoking, demands a keen eye and a frugal hand. You know which berries can be dried in late summer for winter sustenance, which roots can be dug up and stored, and how to make every scrap of meat or vegetable stretch as far as possible. You understand the delicate balance of fermentation for making ale or cider, knowing that these drinks, while offering a bit of warmth and calories, also provide a safer alternative to often contaminated water. Even bread, the staple, is stretched through careful kneading and perhaps mixing with less palatable grains or fillers if the good flour runs low. Your mastery of fire management is paramount. You learn to conserve every ember, burying them in ash at night to ensure they can be easily rekindled in the morning without the arduous process of striking flint or using friction. You understand the properties of different woods, which burn hottest, which last longest, and which are easiest to ignite. Every piece of kindling is precious, and you learn to nurse a dwindling fire, coaxing warmth from seemingly dead embers. The skill of building and maintaining a fire efficiently is as vital as breathing. Water acquisition in winter requires particular ingenuity. When the well freezes solid, you resort to melting snow. But you know not to melt too much at once, as it rapidly cools. Instead, you melt small amounts using precious fuel to provide just enough for drinking and basic cooking. You might fashion rudimentary filters from cloth and sand to ensure what little water you have is as clean as possible, recognizing, even without understanding germs, that clear water is generally safer. One mainstream historical fact about medieval survival strategies is the reliance on communal resource management and a strong sense of mutual aid within villages. When one family faced severe hardship, a lost crop, a devastating illness, the community would often rally to provide support, whether through sharing meager food supplies, helping with chores, or offering a warmer space. This wasn't just altruism. It was a pragmatic recognition that the collapse of one family could weaken the entire village's ability to survive. A quirky or fringe tidbit about medieval survival involves the use of animal bladders or stomachs as makeshift containers. These natural vessels, once thoroughly cleaned and dried, could be used to store precious rendered fat, oil, or even water. Imagine trying to store your rendered pig fat, a vital caloric resource, without a glass jar or plastic container. An animal bladder, though perhaps a bit gruesome, was a surprisingly effective and readily available solution, a testament to utilizing every single part of a slaughtered animal. Historians still argue whether the apparent fatalism often attributed to medieval peasants, particularly concerning their acceptance of death and hardship, was a true reflection of their mindset, or a practical coping mechanism and a form of psychological resilience that allowed them to endure unimaginable conditions. As you make a clever repair to a torn cloak using a bone needle and strong sinew, you feel a quiet pride, a defiance against the elements. It's not fatalism, it's adaptation. Shelter modification is also key. You might use extra layers of daub on your walls, or block up drafts with packed straw. The constant battle against the ingress of cold air is a daily skirmish. You learn to spot the slightest crack, the smallest gap, and instinctively move to plug it, using whatever is at hand: a piece of cloth, a handful of mud, a lump of moss. Every tiny act of improvement adds to your comfort, however marginal. Winter is also a time for resourcefulness in terms of tools and repairs. With limited access to blacksmiths or specialized craftsmen, you learn to be a jack of all trades. A dull axe is carefully sharpened. A broken tool handle is replaced with a freshly cut branch. A leaky bucket is patched with pitch or resin. These are not grand inventions, but small, incremental acts of ingenuity that collectively contribute to your continued survival. You develop a deep appreciation for durable materials and simple, effective designs. Ultimately, your survival strategies are born of necessity and passed down through generations. They are an embodied knowledge, etched into your hands, your muscles, and your very worldview. You don't intellectualize them, you simply do them. You are a creature of instinct and experience, honed by centuries of facing down brutal winters. And as the days slowly, imperceptibly, begin to lengthen, you cling to these hard-won skills, knowing they are your most valuable inheritance, your greatest asset in the ongoing battle against the elements, and your best hope for seeing the grudging, glorious return of spring. After what feels like an eternity of chilling cold, gnawing hunger, and oppressive darkness, a fragile, almost imperceptible shift begins to stir in the world around you. This isn't a sudden burst of warmth, not a dramatic change, but a subtle, almost whispered promise of hope. The thaw's promise. You, the medieval peasant, learn to read these tiny signs with an almost spiritual devotion, for they signify the grudging retreat of winter and the distant, yet undeniable, approach of renewal. The first hint might come on a particularly clear day. The sun, which for months has been a pale, aloof orb, seems to gain a tiny fraction of strength. It hangs a little higher in the sky, and its light, though still weak, carries a hint of warmth that penetrates your layers of clothing, a sensation almost forgotten. You might feel it on your face as you step outside, a fleeting caress that makes you pause, tilting your head skyward in a moment of quiet gratitude. It's not enough to melt the deep snows, but it's a whisper of what's to come. The soundscape of the village begins to change too. The constant crunch of frozen snow underfoot might be replaced by a faint, almost imperceptible slushy sound in sheltered spots. The ice on the communal well might become slightly thinner, easier to break through. You might hear the first drips of water from melting icicles hanging from your thatched roof, a gentle, rhythmic plink that sounds like a tiny, joyful melody after months of frozen silence. These aren't loud noises, but to your attuned ears, they are profound. The animals, too, sense the shift. Your chickens, which have been huddled and reluctant, might show a tiny burst of renewed energy, scratching more vigorously at the frozen ground. The cattle might low with a slightly different tone, a subtle shift from passive endurance to a hint of restless anticipation. Even the wild birds, though still scarce, might offer a few more tentative chirps, a faint overture to the spring chorus yet to come. You watch them, these creatures so closely tied to the natural world, and their subtle shifts reaffirm your own burgeoning hope. One mainstream historical fact about the end of medieval winter is the celebration of Candlemas, February 2nd, a Christian feast day that marked the midpoint between the winter solstice and the spring equinox. While primarily religious, it also held significant secular importance as a traditional day to observe weather patterns. A cloudy Candlemas might mean an early spring, while a sunny one might foretell prolonged winter. This informal Groundhog Day ritual shows how deeply integrated peasant life was with the cycles of the seasons and the desperate hope for a good planting season. A quirky or fringe tidbit about the thaw's promise involves the folk belief in hungry ghosts or spirits of the dead being particularly restless in the late winter, just before the earth awoke. To appease them and ensure a smooth transition to spring, communities might leave out small offerings of food or perform specific rituals near burial sites. It was a recognition of the liminal period, a bridge between the death of winter and the rebirth of spring, where the veil between worlds felt particularly thin. So, your grandmother might sprinkle a few grains outside the hovel as a quiet offering to unseen spirits, just in case. Historians still argue whether the increased spiritual fervor observed during the late winter period in medieval peasant communities was a genuine expression of religious devotion, or a psychological coping mechanism to manage the immense stress and uncertainty of survival until the arrival of spring. As you look at the pale sky, offering a whispered prayer for warmer days, you feel a complex mix of both true faith, but also an undeniable, desperate yearning for relief. The snow itself begins to change. Instead of the dry, powdery flakes of deep winter, it becomes heavier, wetter, clinging to branches. On warmer days, you might see patches of bare, muddy earth emerging, dark stains against the vast white. These patches, though small, are immensely significant. They represent the earth breathing again, a promise that the frozen grip is loosening, however slowly. The smell of the air changes too, carrying a hint of damp earth, of thawing mud, replacing the sharp, sterile scent of deep frost. Your own body, though still tired, feels a subtle awakening. The constant ache in your joints might lessen slightly, the profound lethargy might lift a fraction. You find yourself moving with a little more purpose, a touch more resilience. The thoughts that have been dominated by immediate survival, food, warmth, illness, begin to expand, allowing for tentative planning for spring planting, for repairs to your meager tools. The psychological weight of winter, though not fully lifted, feels marginally lighter. The communal mood also shifts. While still subdued, there's a subtle undercurrent of anticipation, a quiet buzz of hope. People greet each other with a little more warmth, their conversations turning, however briefly, to the prospects of the coming planting season. The feasting of Christmas feels like a distant memory, but the hope of new growth, of new life, feels increasingly tangible. You might hear discussions of which fields will be plowed first, which crops might be planted, cautious optimism slowly replacing resigned endurance. The thaw's promise isn't a sudden deliverance. It's a gradual, painstaking unfolding. It's a testament to the fact that even the most brutal periods must eventually yield. You cling to these signs, these subtle shifts in light, sound, and temperature, understanding that they are not just environmental changes, but profound messages of hope. They are the earth itself beginning to stir from its long, frozen sleep, and in its awakening, you find the strength to believe that you, too, will emerge from the long, dark night of winter. Finally, after what felt like an endless, gray eternity, there it is, the unmistakable, undeniable arrival of spring's arrival. It doesn't burst forth in a riot of color and warmth overnight, but rather unfolds gradually, each day bringing a new, profound relief, a fresh burst of energy, and the sweet, almost intoxicating scent of new life. You, the medieval peasant, greet these first true signs of spring with a weary but profound relief, a quiet jubilation that settles deep in your bones. The most obvious change is the sun. It's no longer a pale, indifferent disk. It climbs higher in the sky, its light growing stronger, warmer, actually penetrating your clothing and warming your skin. You can feel its power as you stand outside, a therapeutic warmth that seems to melt away the aches and stiffness that have plagued your body for months. The days stretch noticeably longer, pushing back the oppressive darkness, allowing for more hours of work and, crucially, more hours of precious natural light. The world, once shrouded in perpetual gloom, is now bathed in an ever-increasing luminescence. The sound of running water becomes a pervasive symphony. The snow, which has insulated the land for so long, begins its serious melt. Rivulets run down paths, streams swell, and the earth, once frozen solid, turns soft and muddy underfoot. The constant drip of melting icicles, the rush of water in ditches, these are the sounds of liberation, of the land shedding its winter skin. You navigate the muddy tracks with a new determination, knowing that the mess is a sign of life, a harbinger of growth. Then come the colors. First, the subtle greens. Tiny, tenacious shoots of grass begin to emerge from the still damp earth, a verdant promise peeking through the brown and gray. Buds on the trees swell and burst, painting the branches with a delicate, ephemeral green haze. The drab, muted palette of winter gives way to the tentative, hopeful hues of spring. You see wildflowers begin to unfurl their petals in sheltered spots, a vibrant splash of yellow or white, a defiant burst of beauty after months of starkness. The air itself undergoes a profound transformation. The crisp, biting cold is replaced by a softer, gentler breeze, carrying the rich, earthy scent of damp soil and awakening vegetation. You can smell the promise of growth, the subtle sweetness of emerging blossoms, a fragrant antidote to the stale, smoky air of your hovel. Taking a deep breath of this fresh, vibrant air feels like drawing life itself into your lungs. Animals, too, emerge from their winter torpor. The chickens are laying more eggs, the cow's milk production increases. Wild birds, absent for months, return to the village, their songs filling the air with cheerful chirps and melodic calls. You hear the buzz of the first bees, a sure sign of life returning to the fields. The sounds of newborn lambs or calves, delicate and vulnerable, are a poignant reminder of the cycle of life continuing, of hope renewed. One mainstream historical fact about spring in medieval peasant life is the critical importance of plowing and planting. With the thaw, the urgent work of preparing the fields for the next harvest begins. Your ox, or horse if you are fortunate, is harnessed, and you spend long, arduous days turning the heavy, muddy earth, breaking up the clods and broadcasting precious seeds. This is the foundation of your survival for the next winter, and every ounce of your energy is dedicated to ensuring a successful planting. A quirky or fringe tidbit about spring's arrival involved the tradition of beating the bounds or processionals around the village fields. This ancient custom, often incorporating both pagan and Christian elements, involved villagers walking the perimeter of their land, sometimes striking the ground with willow branches or carrying banners, to bless the fields, ward off evil, and ensure a bountiful harvest. It was a communal act of optimism, a defiant assertion of human effort against the unpredictability of nature. Imagine the sense of shared purpose as you tramp through the muddy fields with your neighbors, affirming your claim to the land and your hope for its bounty. Historians still argue whether the cyclical nature of peasant life, with its predictable periods of hardship followed by renewal, instilled a deeper sense of patience and resilience, or if it simply perpetuated a cycle of poverty and bare subsistence. As you feel the sun on your back while you work the soil, you acknowledge both. The hardship of winter is profound, but the relief and promise of spring are equally powerful, driving you forward. The human spirit, too, undergoes a revival. Faces that were gaunt and drawn begin to regain a little color. Movements become more fluid, less stiff. Conversations are infused with a new optimism, focusing on the prospects for the harvest, the health of the young animals, and the gradual return to a less desperate existence. The sheer relief of being able to spend more time outdoors, of feeling the sun on your skin, is a tonic for the soul. Spring isn't just about new life. It's about the confirmation of your survival. You made it. Your family made it. The village, however scarred, is still here. You look at your children, their eyes brighter, their steps more energetic, and a profound, quiet satisfaction washes over you. The long night of winter has passed, and though its memory will linger in the aches of your body and the stories you tell, the burgeoning life around you is a testament to resilience, a powerful, undeniable promise that the cycle continues, and hope, like the spring itself, always, eventually, returns.